So I'm here to welcome Daniel Solove, who is a professor of law at the George Washington University Law School. Professor Solove writes in areas of information privacy law, cyberspace law, law and literature, legal pragmatism, and constitutional theory. He teaches information privacy law, criminal procedure, criminal law, and law and literature. He's an internationally known expert at privacy law. He has been interviewed and quoted in the media in several hundred articles and broadcasts, including the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, just to name a few. Professor Solove is the author of The Future of Reputation, Gossip, Rumor, and Privacy on the Internet, which is the book we're going to hear about today, though he also has many other works, including most recently Understanding Privacy. And with that, Professor Solove, thank you.
Thanks. Well, thanks so much for having me out here today. I'm going to spend the first half of our time just giving a brief overview of some of the ideas in the book. But I wanted to save considerable time to chat with you about some of these issues because I think some of the more interesting things come out in the Q&A. So basically what the book is about is how gossip, shame, and reputation are being transformed by the internet in ways that I think are going to have some really profound effects in our society. What got me interested in this is I started blogging back in 2005. I started a blog, and I really enjoyed the experience. I found it to be wonderful. It was fun. It was exciting to be able to see and interact with people who were reading the blog. And it wasn't just me. In fact, many people had the experience of enjoying blogging. Blogs have grown from 50 blogs several years ago to over 50 million today. And I think my stats are a bit out of date. This is from 2006. So I haven't checked recently, but I assume there's even more blogs around now. And I think these developments are great. I think it's wonderful that people can express themselves online. But what I want to talk about is the dark side of this story. I begin my book by talking about an incident that happened in South Korea, in particular on a South Korean subway. And a person who now is known as the dog poop girl. This is a young woman who was on a subway train. She had a little dog with her. The dog pooped on a train. She was in a big hurry, and so she didn't have time to clean it up. She left the train. Well, some people thought this was rude, quite naturally. One person decided, well, let's teach her a lesson. They took her picture with a cell phone camera, put it up on a website. People started writing in and putting up her identifying. They found out who she was. They put up her phone numbers, identifying information. She started receiving harassing phone calls all across the blogosphere in South Korea. People were attacking this woman, criticizing her as the most evil villain that ever walked the face of the earth. Here's a picture of a poster that someone made of the incident. This actually went all across South Korea. It made it into the newspapers. Many people made various posters. It made it around the world. It was written about in the Washington Post. It was written about in newspapers all across the globe. So even beyond South Korea, people were talking about the horrible thing that the dog poop girl, as she became known, did. And so in the past, if someone does something that's rude, we give them an angry stare. One person might say, that was rude. But that's pretty much the end of it. But now the internet allows a cyber posse to gather from around the world to mete out a punishment. And forever, this woman is going to be known as the dog poop girl. Well, life today is really presenting us with a bit of a paradox, I think, that information flows freely, it enhances our freedom and our autonomy, but at the same time, I think it's making us less free. A little bit about why and how this is happening to unpack this. I blog primarily about about the law, and there are other blogs that explore political events or technology and all sorts of other issues. But that's just a fraction of the blogosphere. There's a very large number of blogs that consist mainly of people talking about their own personal information. This is a diary. And in fact, diaries used to be kept in drawers. They used to be locked. Some of them came with locks on them. Well, let me tell you, diaries are so 20th century, because what young people are using today is the internet. They're blogging about their personal lives, about everything that's going on, and they're putting it online for the world to see. And it's not just their own secrets that they're blogging about. They're also writing about their friends. They're writing about their family. They're writing about their teachers. Some teachers are writing about their students. People might write about their enemies or even random people they encountered. And so everyone's being written about. Now, when I was in high school and college, I didn't have a website of my own. I didn't have a blog. There wasn't anything called MySpace or Facebook. Actually, there wasn't anything called Google either. And I owned a computer that looked like this. And I looked like this. So life was really hard back in those days. But the generation growing up today, they live a different life. They have blogs and social network websites. This is a cartoon I have from the book. I have it in the book here. And it says, well, yes, we could read your blog, or you could just tell us about your school day. This really captures the fact that bloggers are very young. One estimate shows, and this was several years ago, that over half the blogs are written by teenagers under the age of 19. I want you to, if you close your eyes and imagine all the things that you did in high school and college that you want to forget. Now, most likely, it's probably been forgotten. That's because it was stored in this device. But the difficulty is that when it's online, it becomes harder for things to vanish, in fact. And they're easy to dig up, thanks to you guys. In fact, make it very easy for people to find information. We're witnessing the rise of what I call Generation Google. This is the generation growing up whose lives in high school and college, maybe even earlier than high school now, are chronicled in various snippets of information that can be found online. And if you want to find out about them, you plug their name into Google and you can pull up information about wherever they are, no matter where they might go to. You can't escape your high school gossip by just moving away. You can't escape it by people just forgetting about it, which would happen in the past. Now you can move to Australia and an employer can do a Google search on you, or anyone can do a Google search on you, and can find out these fragments of information about you. Now, you might have heard of someone known as the Star Wars kid. How many people have heard of a little bit of the Star Wars kid? So about most of you, actually. Briefly, for the few who haven't heard of the Star Wars kid, this is a 15-year-old kid in Canada. He filmed himself awkwardly waving around what was a golf ball retriever, but he pretended that it was a lightsaber. And sorry for him, he really didn't have George Lucas's choreographers, so he looked like a fool as he played around with this lightsaber. Other kids found the video. They thought it was pretty funny. They put it up on a video sharing site, originally not YouTube. I don't know what the site was called, but they put it on the site, and it became a worldwide sensation. Tens of millions of people downloaded this video. Tens of millions. Some estimates have it even like in the stratosphere. I don't believe some of the upper estimates, but I think it's safe to say that it could be well over 10 million. People started creating mock-ups of the video. They added special effects. They added Star Wars music. They added versions where you go to the thing and the Star Wars text streams across the screen. They tried to do a petition to actually get him put into the Phantom Menace. In fact, they mocked him online. There's tons of commentary making fun of this kid, laughing at him. Other mock-up videos arose. This is a search from YouTube. Here's just some of the versions. I couldn't fit them all on the screen. Some of the variations of the Star Wars kid. And so basically, if you Google this guy's name, you get his Wikipedia entry. It's the Star Wars kid. Forever, he will be known as the Star Wars kid. And there might be some people who might say, well, great, this is my claim to fame. I'm going to make like more videos and become really famous, and good for them if that's what they want. Unfortunately, he really didn't want this. He didn't want to be known as a Star Wars kid. Actually, it's a very sad story. He actually had some kind of emotional issues and dropped out of school and basically has never been heard from again. Another quick example of some of the things going on. This is an incident, the Washingtonienne incident. Curious, how many have heard about this? So only a few, actually. Only one person? Wow, this doesn't get around. Maybe because I'm from D.C. and that's why I know so much about this. But basically, Jessica Cutler was basically working in a U.S. senator's office, and she started a little blog for her friends about her dating experiences. And she was very explicit about, in particular, everything that she did on her dates, including sex. And so she blogged, and she dated a lot of different guys, 6 different guys at different points, talking very explicitly about their sex life. And she started dating an attorney who worked for the senator. And in particular, their sex life was interesting because it involved spanking and talk of handcuffs. And so a political blog called Wonket, which is a very popular blog with a very high traffic, picked up the story, linked to her blog, and it became an overnight sensation. It was written about, it made a cover story in the Washington Post magazine. It led her to get a book deal. This is the cover of the book over here. Got a $300,000 advance for her book. She got a Playboy spread as well. There's actually going to be a show, I don't know when it's going to be, but based on her, loosely based on her, produced by Sarah Jessica Parker for HBO at some point soon. So look for it. I don't know when this is coming out. But basically, she made it big. The guy who she was dating really didn't like this, and he sued her for public disclosure of private facts, saying, you've breached my privacy by writing about, in particular, our sex life. Well, she actually has declared bankruptcy, so we don't really know what's going on with the lawsuit. I don't know what happened to all the money either, but apparently the suit is now, I think, sort of indefinitely stayed, and we don't know what's going to happen to it. But that is the Washingtonienne case. It's just some examples of some of the things that are going on. We're starting to see the future of reputation, that the internet is really starting to enable a lot more information about people to be available. And some might say this is a good thing. Maybe there's more information about people. We can have a better insight into who people really are. It's a good thing that we can Google people and find out more about them. But there's also a problem, and that is that the information that you might find in these fragments is often incomplete. It's often out of context, and more information doesn't necessarily lead to better judgments about who people might be. It might just lead to hasty condemnation and bad judgments about people. And it also might enslave people to their past, that if they'd made a mistake in the past at some point, they can never, ever have a second chance. They can never, ever change. They always have to be accountable for something, explain it, because they know it might pull up in a search under their name, and there's very little they can do about it. So what should the law do? I'm a law professor, and so the first thing I think of is law. The difficulty here is that law can only do so much, and I realize that. It's sort of a humility that I approach the legal solution, because I think that at the end of the day, the really important thing is we have to figure out how to change norms to get people to be more responsible about what they write about others online. But I do think there are certain things the law can do to help the process. In particular, I think there are three general approaches. If you look at all the different legal solutions out there, I think you could sort of categorize them into three categories. First is the libertarian approach. This is one of the most popular approaches, is that the idea that, look, when you get the law involved, it's just going to make things worse. It's going to create all sorts of chilling effects and costs. So the best thing is leave it alone. Leave it be. The law shouldn't get involved and shouldn't be protecting privacy here. The problem is that I think doing nothing really doesn't do anything to address the problem. And there's nothing to suggest that the problem is going to get better. It could get worse. And so I think that the libertarian approach is not really a viable approach. The alternative in the other direction is the authoritative approach, which we're seeing happen more and more. And that's when politicians will enact laws that are very short-sighted, like laws that try to make it restrict anonymous speech in very problematic ways. Or another example is the prosecution of Lori Drew in the Megan Meyer incident. This is where a mother created a fake MySpace profile, and it led to a very tragic result. She created this fake profile, and people were using it to befriend a teenager who then had some depression problems and ultimately wound up committing suicide. That's very tragic, and what she did, I think, is very immoral. But she was prosecuted very recently. The trial just concluded for breaking federal law because she violated the terms of service of MySpace. That's right. The theory of the prosecution was that if you violate the terms of service for a website, even if you could be guilty of a federal crime. And if you do that, it could be up to a year in prison. And if you do that when you're possibly committing a tort, like intentional infliction of emotional distress or defamation, guess what? You could have like 5 to 10 years in prison. That could be a felony. Now, I think that's overkill. I think that's going way out of bounds in terms of responding to the kind of issues that we see. And so I recommend a middle ground approach that basically we want the law to be there as an incentive to get people to work things out amongst themselves. But what we don't really want is a lot of lawsuits. So we kind of want the threat of lawsuits, but we really don't want the lawsuits to actually materialize. And so that's really what I recommend. And I won't get into the details because it gets a little bit technical in terms of like certain reforms we need to make to our legal system to get the system to be a little bit more nimble and to make sure that the incentives are right so that there aren't too many lawsuits. But what I want to spend my time talking about is one of the things that's holding back the law from doing much of anything right now is that it's laboring under really antiquated understandings of privacy. And so I want to just take a moment to talk about how the current law of torts, which is what people would use to redress harms, invasions of their privacy, how that is falling short. And this sort of is writ large throughout the law. It's not just the torts. It's sort of these conceptions, old conceptions of privacy really do hold down the law and make it very, very hard for the law to really respond to some of the problems that we're seeing. Yeah?
Just a quick question. I never figured out what a tort is.
Well, a tort is a legal wrong. And so an example, the most simplest example would be you're driving a car, you have a car accident. If you're at fault, you've committed a tort. And you would be sued for negligent driving, causing the accident. That would be a tort suit. Defamation, which would be libel or slander, that's also a tort.
Anything that breaks the law is a tort?
Well, anything, it's a civil law. So a criminal law would be a crime. But if a civil wrong where someone can sue you for that civil wrong would be a tort. And so anytime, if you're ever sued by another private party, it's going to be for a tort violation, or it could be a contract violation. But a contract would be you have to have a contract or make a promise if it's promissory estoppel. But for tort, it would be there doesn't have to be a contract or any kind of promise. It could be a stranger. You know, if I took my pen and threw it into your head, let's say, and it caused you an injury, you could sue me for a tort. And that's basically what a tort is. Basically a legal wrong that, you know, the victim is entitled to a monetary remedy for. And so a few of the ideas of privacy that I think are antiquated. One is that the law currently views privacy in a binary way. And basically, it sees things as either private or public. And once something is exposed to the public, once it's out in the public domain, it can no longer be considered private. And if you're ever in a public place, the view is tough luck, no privacy. If you want privacy, lock yourself in your house and don't ever step foot into the sunlight ever again. That is the view. The problem is that there's most people rarely do that. People have to go out and they live their lives in public, but they expect some degree of privacy in public. An example is, suppose you're at the drugstore and you're buying your various hygiene products and your medications and whatever you might buy, and you're about to go and check it out, and a blogger comes over and who has a blog called What They Bought at the Drugstore. And he takes a picture of your cart, takes a picture of you, and people then would identify you, and they identify the items in your cart, and that's the blog. People can then search for your name and see what you're buying. That we could say, look, you're in public, right? You're in public. You've exposed this to the public. You know, the store clerk is going to see what you buy. But I submit that you do have privacy in what you're buying, even though you're in public, because your expectation is that no one's going to be paying attention and looking into what you're buying, and the store clerk is not going to remember who you are and put it together with your name, and it's not going to wind its way on the internet. And so I think that we need to recognize more privacy in public, especially in a day and age where everyone has a cell phone camera, where it's so easy to capture pictures and video, and it's only going to get better. It's going to only, yeah.
If you don't mind.
Sure. Can we wait till I do the Q&A, because I think that might be better to finish up the talk. So another concept of privacy that I think needs to be rethought is the way the law currently deals with confidentiality. Right now, in the United States, the view is that if you share a secret with another person and they decide to blab it to the world, it's generally viewed as tough luck. You shouldn't have trusted them. You assume the risk that they're going to betray you. Now, in certain cases, we don't recognize that. So you go to the doctor, you go to a lawyer, and you tell them something. They have duties of confidentiality to keep that confidential. If they breach that, they can be sued for a breach of confidentiality. Now, so very limited case we have in the U.S. a protection of confidentiality. Now, in England, the law is very different. In England, in fact, friends could be liable for breaching confidentiality. Family members, ex-spouses, even illicit lovers can in fact be held to a duty of confidentiality. I think that the English approach is actually fairly wise, and I think that we should think about possibly bringing more of that law into the United States. Maybe not wholesale, but at least importing some of the concepts that if it's clear that you tell somebody a secret, then they have a duty to keep it confidential. And if they breach that duty, in certain ways, we might not necessarily want to punish every possible gossip if you just tell one person. But let's say you put it on a blog, we might say that could be actionable if it has a widespread disclosure. So there are ways to think about how we might enhance the concept of confidentiality to better protect privacy. And a final point on this, and that is the notion of control. And I'll begin with a story. Dr. Laura Schlesinger is a very famous conservative radio talk show host. And she talks a lot about family values and strict family values. Well, it so happened that one of her ex-lovers, about 20 years before, had taken some nude pictures of her during their love affair. And apparently he must have been in need of money because he sold them to a video viewer website. And the website happily put them up, and she was appalled. She was furious. She sued the website, claiming, "You've invaded my privacy by posting these pictures." And she lost. The court said, "Sorry, First Amendment, you really don't win here. This is your tough luck." Now, what also happened was other websites said, "We like these pictures. They're lucrative. They're great. We'll copy them and post them on our sites." And so other voyeur websites started posting these pictures. Well, the video voyeur website wasn't particularly happy about this. They paid for these pictures. They sued the other websites. And guess what? They won. Now, why did this happen? Well, because Dr. Laura had privacy protection. The website had copyright protection. And if you have a choice between privacy and copyright, choose copyright, because copyright gives you a lot more protections. Now, if I take your photograph, I have copyright protection in that photograph. It's my photograph. I have the copyright in it. You have privacy protections. And so that's what happens here. The taker of the photograph has a lot more control and power over that photograph than the subject of that photograph. Now, my point here is not to say, okay, let's make privacy like copyright, and let's just use copyright law to protect privacy. My point is this, that I often have heard in a lot of debates, and I see it all the time, where people say, look, how can we protect privacy today? The genie's out of the bottle. The information's out there. There is nothing that can be done. There's nothing the law can do. There's no way that the law can control information. It's out there. But the interesting thing is that in copyright law, that's not the case. Copyright law, it's all about, no, information that's out there and it's publicly available could still be controlled. You still have certain rights to control it. You still have certain ability. So, you can make, I have papers and even books online, and I want people to use them, but I have a Creative Commons license that allows certain uses and disallows other uses. And so we understand that there's certain more nuanced sets of rights that we can have with regard to information. But when it comes to privacy, the law says, can't do anything. And so my point is not, let's make privacy like copyright. My point is that we need to think about the law can provide control if it cared, if it wanted to. If the people on privacy had the high-powered lobbyists that the people on the copyright holders do, like the MPA and the RIAA, if they were them, we'd have tremendously good privacy protections. We don't have privacy protections because we don't want to. The law didn't, Congress didn't want to enact them, or legislatures don't. But it's not impossible. It is possible, and that's sort of the point. It is possible to do more if we wanted to think about a nuanced way of controlling privacy. Now, one point about speech, because someone might say, what about speech? Doesn't this infringe on speech if we protect privacy? And the answer is yes. If we overprotect privacy, we could really have chilling effects on free speech, and I don't want to do that. One of the difficulties of this problem is that both speech and privacy are both very important, and we don't want to sacrifice one to the other, which is why I don't want to go too far in the protection of privacy, because that could really start hurting free speech. But I do think that currently the law overprotects speech and underprotects privacy. So I want to fix the balance a little bit better. I don't want to do radical things, but I do think that the balance is a bit out of whack. And one of the main reasons why I think the balance is out of whack is something that is known as the Communications Decency Act, Section 230. I don't know if you've heard of this, but it's a provision of the law that grants immunity to ISPs and websites and blogs and others for content that is supplied by other people. So an example would be, I have a blog. You can post comments to my blog. I'm not liable for your comment that you post. And 230 basically says I shouldn't be held liable for something that you said. And I think that's a generally sound principle that, you said it, not me. I shouldn't be responsible for it. You posted it. However, one thing that's happened with 230 is courts have taken it and twisted it and interpreted it in ways that have made it go far beyond what I think it really should be doing. And they've said this, that not only does it say that you can't be the speaker, but there's another form of liability in defamation and privacy, and that is a liability that even if I'm not the speaker, if I distribute information knowing or having reason to know that that information is defamatory or invasive of privacy, I could be liable. Now, I have to know that. I have to have. You have to prove that I have some knowledge this is a problem, and then I could be liable. Now, the courts have read 230 to knock that out too, which means that suppose someone posts a defamatory or a comment about you invading your privacy. They post in the comment section to my blog your personal diary, and you write to me and say, please take this comment down. Please delete that comment. And I read the comment and say, I love this. This is great. Great information. I'm keeping it. 230 lets me do that. It lets something like this exist called Juicy Campus. This is a website that, how many of you have heard of Juicy Campus before? Basically, it's a website that exploits 230 immunity. They solicit gossip about people from various college campuses. So anyone can post. They try to make it easier for people to be anonymous when they're posting. And so it becomes this gossip forum in various campuses where you have information on this site. And I think that, and the site says, look, we're immune. We don't post it ourselves. We just go out and get other people to say it. Well, I think this really exploits the immunity. I think it exploits what 230 is about, and I think it really promotes irresponsibility when it comes to what goes on here. And so what I think is better is to say, look, you're generally not going to be responsible for comments posted by others, but if you know or have reason to know that a comment is defamatory or invasive of privacy, you should take it down. And the law should encourage that rather than what it currently does, which is doesn't encourage that at all. So let me end here, and I'd like to spend the rest of the time chatting with you with some Q&A.
Thank you very much for coming. That's very interesting. I was particularly interested that you think we should try to change the norm to encourage people to be more responsible about what they post online, what they put online, what they reveal online about themselves and others. I would put it to you that you're on the wrong side of history, that the norm that is changing, and we've seen kind of precocious examples of this happening in flares of publicity, but it's going to become much more normal, is that everybody does dumb things in college. Everybody does dumb things in high school. Everybody knows about it, and everybody says, yeah, they were young. Everybody knows that our current president took cocaine and smoked marijuana, or our future president took cocaine and smoked marijuana in college. And everybody says, yeah, okay, so did the current one, but nobody talks about it, yeah. And that's last year.
Okay, well, I have a couple thoughts on that. I think it's a very valid point. I think for certain things, norms change. I think it's now possible for a public official to have smoked marijuana, and that's fine. But there are a lot of norms where people are still very hypocritical, things that they themselves did. And that, for instance, suppose someone took, I'll use a really, kind of crass example, right? A crude example. Suppose someone took a picture of another person masturbating and put it online. Now, maybe the person said, hey, everyone masturbates. It shouldn't be embarrassing. But people would still be incredibly embarrassed. People would still be mocked and humiliated for that.
Now they will.
What?
Now they will.
Okay, I'll get to the future. Time? Maybe, but maybe not. We don't know how norms are going to change. People can still be very hypocritical and judgmental, even for things that they themselves do. Now, maybe you say, well, if just repeated exposure will change it. Maybe in some times. But I say, well, what will the generation who's sort of spilling out things now and posting their naked, drunken pictures on the internet do when their kids are their age? When their kid turns 16, will these people help their kid upload their naked, drunken picture and say, yeah, just like I did when I was a kid? Or would they say, maybe that isn't a good thing to do? do norms change or not? Well, no, they could say, look, that's what people did in high school. But I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure that people would change in that way. I still think that, my sense is of the one thing that's going to remain stable is hypocrisy. And I do think that people will often condemn others for things that they get caught in that other people that they have done themselves.
I think that's where the law should be, encouraging society away from hypocrisy. Hypocrisy is the evil, not the activity.
But I don't necessarily think that hypocrisy can be wiped away that easily. I think that, and to some extent, I think that norms take a long time to change. And what happens to all the people who are harmed during that process of norm change? This argument actually happens a lot in the outing context, of outing of gays. And there's been this long argument of, like, when is it moral or immoral to out somebody as gay? And some of the arguments were like, look, and this was going back into like the 60s, 70s. Look, if you just outed everybody, then people would realize that a lot of people are gay, and therefore the stigma would decrease and the norms would change that way. Maybe that's the case, but you could have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who could really be harmed during that process. Do we sacrifice them for that norm change? And just say, tough, we've got to do this to you because we've got to change this norm that we don't like, which may or may not have changed. It's very, very hard to have that kind of control or hope over a norm change. Now, there are other arguments on the outing front that are like, well, why don't we just out people who are hypocrites, public officials who, attack gays, but then who are gay themselves. And that argument, I think, has been a bit more popular in terms of the outing. I still think that can be somewhat troubling because sort of defining, who is a hypocrite, who's not, whose standards govern, and I think that there's someone could still take a public position on something and dislike something, even if they themselves are doing it. Yes, it undercuts their position a little bit, but I still think that if you look at a lot of our moral standards, they're much, much higher than what most people do. And maybe we say, no, let's bring them down to what people do. But an example would be negligence in tort law, right? Driving. Juries every day will find people liable for driving recklessly and negligently. But that's how most people drive. And so we have an idealized standard to some extent in the law. We want to hold ourselves up to a higher standard even though we know that most of us are going to fail that standard. Now, do we just say, oh, that's just the way people are. We should all just say that's the standard. Or should we say, well, no, in certain times the law actually deliberately adopts higher standards. And you might disagree with the standard. You might say, well, normatively, no, I think, that certain things should be treated differently. And maybe that happens over time. But I really do worry about the process of kind of throwing it all up and sort of opening up all the blinds and sort of hoping that people will come to a sort of an enlightened, view of what's good and what's not and how to judge other people or not. My sense is they probably won't judge other people particularly well. I just think human judgment is flawed. And I don't think it's going to sort of systematically improve. But that's maybe my cynicism and your hope. But that's where we're at.
Oh, I'm ready. Hi. Well, okay, so there's a couple things that I feel like we need to address here. So if someone's 16 and they put naked pictures of themselves on the internet, it is illegal. Like, it's already illegal because they're a minor. So I don't think that the problem is going to be with high school kids posting nude photos that are come up later, because if their parents were paying any attention, they would have gotten that taken away. But things like with the woman on the subway with the dog with the poop, right? The difference between public and private used to be enough of a distinction so that people would go out and have parlor decorum. Like, they wouldn't let their dog shit on the subway. Curse all the time. And there's this thing where people now go outside of their houses and pretend they're still in their houses, like they shout in the movie theaters, or they do these things that are no longer no longer regulated by social norms. And what you're trying to imply is that the law should step in and regulate those social norms. But I think the internet is stepping in and regulating those social norms. If that woman's dog went to the bathroom in her house, no one would ever know, right? But since it was on the subway and it was an indecent thing that she didn't take responsibility for, it's put to the internet. And of course, there's like, the sharks on FARC and DIG that just tear people apart. And there are a small percentage of just really angry people that can lash out at people. But I mean, if the woman took her own responsibility, she wouldn't be in that situation. And I don't think that all the onus should fall on the people who write it or the people who post it, and certainly not on the, helpless internet companies that are not going to put the manpower in to troll everyone's blogs every day and make sure no one, to put it on us would be a little extreme. Okay. But maybe it should be on everyone having a responsibility that when they leave their house, they act as if they know they're in public, right? And they act accordingly. Maybe the thing with the guy with the paddles and spanking, maybe that was a thing that he should have really addressed with a woman who he's going to be intimate with, whether or not she was going to post it on the internet before he brought out the whips and chains.
Assume that, and I guess there's a lot in your
the
comment,
assumption's the problem, right? Because you can't penalize someone for, like, I can assume lots of things about people, but does that mean that I should be held as like the innocent lamb because I make this assumption?
That innocent. I guess there's a lot in your comment that there's about like 3 or 4 points there I want to get to. I'm not sure that you're so innocent when we do have some fairly clearly defined, fairly stable social expectations about secrets. And I think that we would say probably most of us would know certain things. Like we all know like not to stand too close. There's a few people who probably don't know, who like invade your personal space. Just like I think most people would have a sense in the context of when something's a secret and when something's not a secret. I actually think that there's fairly stable. Yes, there's going to be a few people who have absolutely no discretion.
What about when it's a crime? Is the dog going to the bathroom on the subway a crime?
No, it's not a crime. It could be possibly.
Littering?
It depends on the law. But getting to that, there's nothing wrong with someone taking your picture and bringing it to the police. I don't think that's the problem I have is when people say, we're going to use the internet and take it into our own hands. We're going to create a mob who's basically we're going to decide. Because what if you're wrong? What if you don't know the whole story? What about people who have a site like Nuremberg Files, anti-abortion proponents who basically put up something that basically puts up personal information about abortion doctors so other people can go and kill them? What if it's norms you don't like? Who says that the norm being enforced is one that you're going to agree with? And secondly, the people who are doing this often, it enables a kind of crowd mob mentality where people just try to outdo each other. And it takes it out of the law. There's no real due process. If you have it with the police, you have people investigate and see if there's proof and do this. Now, granted, they're not going to investigate a lot of these petty things. But the alternative is to take people and punish them by permanently putting this on the internet, throwing out all kinds of threats and accusations, which sometimes could involve other people as well, and really making it very, very hard for the legal system to deal with it. And so in my book, there's an example of a kid who is like 15 or 16 who stole a person's cell phone. And he took pictures with the cell phone but didn't realize those pictures were uploaded to a site. Well, the person whose cell phone was stolen got the pictures and posted them up, and they included not just him but also his girlfriend and his family, and people started attacking this guy, making all sorts of racist comments about him, and then putting his picture on pornographic images and doing all sorts of things. Now, when the guy posted it found out this guy was actually a minor, realized like, look, that if he were a minor and he got arrested for this crime, that would be expunged from his record. It wouldn't be out in public. You wouldn't have people making threats against him and doing these obscene pictures of him. And it wouldn't also implicate his family. The pictures of other people associated with him wouldn't create risks that someone might try to be a vigilante against him. And he actually said, cool it, guys, stop it. I really don't want you to stop this, harassing this kid. I've gone to the authorities, leave him alone. And they basically said no, and they started harassing him. And so people, the danger is things really can spiral out of control with some of these mobs. And I think that I tend to like I think we have the legal system for a reason, and that's to make sure orderly society. And that used to be the case, if we go back to the Middle Ages, where that's when people would report a crime or something, and the posse would gather up and they'd go out and kill the person. That's how justice was meted. I think we've made a great advance, and I don't think it's a good thing to kind of bring it back with the internet, no matter how rude and obnoxious people might be. And
do you think that the mobs that you're trying to stop aren't maybe the law should deal with the mob as opposed to dealing with the people who are like putting up information?
It's difficult. It's difficult to deal with the mob because a lot of the people are posting anonymously. It'd be very hard to track them down. It's often the collective attacks. It might be very, very hard to track, the people who might be taking the vigilante action.
I think we all know that it's never anonymous on the internet, right? There's always a way to find out who wrote what it is.
Things spill out into the real world. It's not just attacks on the internet. It's also like there was an example where Fox. This wasn't the internet, but you could easily see it happening on the internet. Fox News found out that the home that this terrorist was living somewhere. This person suspected of terrorism that they thought. They posted this guy's home address. Well, people started going to the home and spray painting terrorist. Actually misspelled it. They spray painted the home. They threatened the home. Well, the guy had moved out, and a family had moved in. And they were now under like death threats, afraid for their very lives. That's what can happen when things really spiral out of control.
A vandal, people who are making threats, people who are showing up places to attack someone, those are criminals. And while I would never really want to defend Fox News in any public forum, I mean, perhaps, the idea should be that you shouldn't trust Fox News for information who may give you wrong information.
People respond. I mean, people do and they respond. And so the thing is that's
on them. I mean, but their responses are on them too.
But it still causes harms to other people. There are great harms when people, trust false information. Even if you say, I wouldn't trust it, if other people do. If I posted defamatory information about you on a blog, and you would say, I don't believe it, and who else would believe it on that blog? Well, people might.
Well, I think the generation change is that the people who are around are starting to learn how to deal with that stuff being out. I mean, I've been at the sharks of Fark and Dig before. Like, people attack lots of people for many different things. And at some point, you have to just stop reading the unending scrolls of information.
Some people might, but some people won't. There's actually a couple of cases of people committing suicide, actually in Korea fairly recently, because they didn't deal with this very well. And especially young people, who often have a much tougher time handling this, especially like teenagers, and say, oh, don't worry, in 10 years you'll be laughing at this incident. A lot of them don't. A lot of them handle it badly. Should we just say, tough, or should we do something? I kind of think we should do something. I don't think that, we should kind of leave it the Wild West out there.
Should let it.
I don't know who was next.
I just had a question because I understand what you're saying about kind of finding this middle ground where we're using law to bring out, hopefully, the best in people and encourage them to do the right thing. My question is, when we're looking at these examples, do you find any role for the companies themselves? So do you see any responsibility for Google or YouTube or any of those companies to monitor what is going on their site? Obviously, with 100% Juicy, that's a specific instance where you feel like the website itself is inciting that. It's not simply a byproduct of the freedom that they have. So do you feel like there's a responsibility on the search engines themselves to police what's on their sites?
Well, I think that it depends on the circumstance. I think in most cases, I think that, sort of proactively monitoring and trying to determine what's defamatory or not is not a good thing. I think that the site should have some mechanism if someone wants something off, to be able to respond to it. And so there's a difference between sort of actively monitoring and making your own judgment in the first instance versus someone, let's say, calls up a AOL or a site and says, hey, there's this terrible thing about me. Can you do something about it? And they say, get lost. I do think there might be some responsibilities there to at least have some kind of department or staff to deal with these things. Now, there are other things. Google, I think, has extensive staff dealing with people who try to manipulate Google to sort of get better Google rankings and play all kinds of games with Google. I don't know the extent to which Google has a staff to sort of deal with privacy or defamation issues, or if they have that at all. But, certainly companies, when they care about something, will sort of take steps to address it. And I think there might be something where we want to have some monitoring. We obviously don't want too much monitoring. We don't want Google to say, hey, we're not going to, anytime anything we think looks like gossip, we're just going to, not show it in any search results. I think that's problematic. But I do think the alternative of, someone who really wants something, taken down, who has no recourse, or let's say someone posted a naked picture of another person on the internet, and they got the other person to take it down, but it's still in Google Cache, and the other person doesn't know how to change the code to have it sort of re-crawl, and they call up Google and they say, please, will you take it out of the cache? I don't think it's too much of an imposition to ask Google to possibly do something there, or to even work on developing a system where that could happen faster without sort of relying on, let's say, that person with the site to kind of reprogram the to get it to crawl. I don't even know how to. I know it can be done. I don't know how to do it myself. So I would assume a lot of bloggers don't know how to get the thing recrawled.
Put me down as in favor of using the internet, at least in part, to help with social norms that are falling apart. But is there any? But in the past, you could enforce. I mean, things were local. If somebody was obnoxious, everybody knew it in town. They talked about it for 2 years and they forgot about it. And if the person really didn't like it, they could move. Is there anything the law can do that's intermediate between letting obnoxious people be just assholes in public? I mean, like that woman, and having their life ruined for life. I mean,
Yeah.
Is there intermediate?
It's tricky because, I mean, obviously, I think, shaming is generally okay. Like, we want people to be shamed for something that's rude. We want people to tell other people off. The difficulty is that in the past, shaming could be done in a way that wasn't permanent, didn't put something permanently on the internet, stayed at the scene. And now when you put it online, you change the nature of shaming. You change the nature of gossip. I don't think just a little bit of gossip isn't that bad. I mean, yes, it can hurt people and it can be a problem, but generally speaking, just whispering a little bit in high school about someone, I don't want the law to get involved there. But there's a difference when you put something online and then it becomes available around the world and could be widely disseminated and doesn't go away. It changes the nature of these things and makes them much more problematic. And the difficulty is, I don't want to say that's like no gossip. People are always going to gossip. No shaming. The difficulty is, how do we keep shaming in a way that doesn't sort of permanently injure people and doesn't spiral out of hand? That's, I think, a really, really tough question. How do you get that balance? And the internet, the difficulty is it's kind of throwing the balance off kilter, I think. And how do we get back to a better balance? I don't have the perfect answer there. I'm trying in some of the things I suggest to kind of push it back a little bit. But ultimately, especially with shaming, it's very, very hard to keep that under control and control it. It's almost impossible to sort of go after the people who are posting all these comments because it's sort of the totality of the thing. I mean, it can be done, but it's tremendously difficult and expensive to try to go after it. And also sort of trying to figure out like the appropriate tort remedy there is tricky when it comes to shaming. Because often, in a lot of cases, not an invasion of privacy. It could rise to certain threats or intentional infliction of emotional distress, perhaps, for some of the things that people do. But again, those are very, very hard things to prove under current law. And the danger is if we make intentional infliction of emotional distress too easy to prove, then it becomes really problematic. If I call you a jerk, you shouldn't be able to sue me, I don't think. But some people might say, I'm offended, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Well, the standard on the tort is very, very high. That won't cut it. I don't think we want to push it down, and I think that gets way too restrictive of speech. So it's trying to get that right balance, and it's very, very tricky in the shaming context.
Yes, hi.
I think we're going to unfortunately have to wrap up, but thank you so much. And for those of you who are interested, Mr. Solove will be available during lunch. A few of us will be going up to lunch, so if you want to join us, feel free. All right, thank you.